Everybody. My name is Dr. Michael Viega. I'm the communications editor for Voices, and I'm really pleased to welcome today Dr. James Hiller, author of a new article in the newest edition of Voices, The Impact of Singing Engagement on Food Intake of Individuals with Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementias, a multi-site repeated measure study. Dr. James Hiller is an assistant professor of music therapy and coordinator of the music therapy program at the University of Dayton. His research focuses on music therapy theories, applications, and research with particular emphasis on the intersection of music and emotions, clinical improvisation and song methods, and music therapy education and training. So let's welcome Dr. Hiller. Hey, Dr. Hiller.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, buddy. Good. I'm going to call you Jim.
Good.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate this. And I'm interested in talking about this study with you because as I read your bio, and as people get into this article, it's a bit of a departure for you in terms of what you typically study and especially a multi-site repeated measure study. So just interested in describing your journey of what brought you to this particular study and perhaps how you see it integrating with your previous research agendas.
So we did a study, Susan Gardstrom and I and a couple other folks back in 2010 or 2011 with this very similar idea of working with older adults with dementia. And what initiated that study was I have been going to the same facility that we did the study at for 15 years and with students, and our sessions were always in the late morning. And as we were leaving, they were heading to lunch and they were pumped up. They'd had a great time. They seemed really socially interacting with each other and just feeling up. And so we got to thinking that maybe this is really helping their noontime food intake, their nutritional intake. So we did a study back then, and there were a lot of method problems with that study. And so I always wanted to revisit it because I thought it was a good concept and an important issue to help these folks with. Nutrition's a big deal for folks with dementia.
Yeah.
Affects all sorts of aspects of their lives as they continue to deteriorate.
Right.
So yeah. So also we have very little replication research in music therapy.
Right.
Right? Can you think of any replication research?
Right.
So
yeah.
I thought, let's try to plug a hole and see what happens with this.
This was kind of a repeated from the first time where you said there was a lot of method issues, but you
right.
did the same design. Yeah. And what changes were made, or can you talk about some of what I'm assuming to be internal validity concerns that came up during the study?
Well, I changed the methodology. So before we had a control group, and in this one, the participants were their own controls.
Right.
I expanded it by the first study. I think we had maybe 9 or 10 people in the treatment group.
Right.
And this one expanded to 28.
Wow.
Try to pump the numbers up.
Yep.
I also went to 3 different facilities of different socioeconomic levels. So I had an inner city facility, kind of a suburban one, and then a rather upscale one. Try to just see what we get in terms of differences among these folks and what their experience is like.
Right.
So that, and then method-wise, cleaned it up to the point where the data we collected was absolutely solid. in terms of we weighed every single plate and cup and spoon and napkin
Wow.
that
Mm-hmm.
that these people touched while they were eating. I was able to hire a couple students with grant money, and they were just fabulous. How attentive they were to the whole process. So yeah, so we got really really clean data. That was part of all the changes we made. Um, Tried to be real careful about choosing the song material that the
Yeah.
therapists brought into the facility, and we can talk about that
Yeah.
process too. That was
Oh, it's interests me the decision making process in terms of saying, yeah, what songs were used.
right, right. So like the first study, I started with the concept of familiarity rather than preference.
Mm-hmm.
You know, music therapy has all sorts of studies, preference this, preference that. These folks really cannot tell you what their preference is, and their families really can't tell you what their preferences are. But we can focus on familiarity by honing in on the eras in which they were younger folks and listening and dancing to the music in their world, and what was hip uh, for them as younger adults. Um, and so that whole process of figuring out everyone's age and looking for tight averages of when these folks were younger and listening to music, buying
Mm-hmm.
music, whatever. And also, so there were about half of the folks were African American, and half were white, and some in my area in Dayton, Ohio, we have a pretty large Appalachian
Right.
contingency. And so the musics of these different facilities really mattered
Yeah.
what you would consider familiar for the three different locations. So again,
So can we just I'm interested in just as a quick aside, and how the definition between preference and familiarity, where preference would be, I would imagine, um, something from their song biography, something from their song, something that they would consider to be the soundtrack to their individual experience, versus this came out when I was in my 20s and I'm familiar with it, which both would be very different experiences, especially related to if you're looking to see if it would increase intake, or it would have some kind of afterglow after the sinning experience.
right, right, and so if you think about 28 different people having 28
Right.
different batches of preferences from all sorts of intersections of their lives,
Yeah.
it's just not possible to put together a repertoire for such a study.
Right.
Whereas
Exactly.
familiarity, I we have access to all the oldest Billboard
Yeah.
charts
Right.
for every year, and it's just astounding. It, it was a great way to find the music and to work with the music and to work with the therapists. We worked together to actually kind of hone stylistically some accuracy from how the folks might have heard these tunes.
I think that's a strength for the internal validity in a strange way, at least especially in the United States. I'm not
Yes.
sure what global audiences experiences are, but in the United States, we do have um, the phenomenon of music therapists working in nursing homes where they often are sitting with groups of 12 plus, often into the 20s, and I've heard other stories of much more. And you know not saying that the ethical implications of that, but that's just the lived experience of many music therapists working in nursing homes, who have to work in the conditions of maybe not being able to pull every preference out, but has to work within familiarity.
Yeah. Yeah. And familiarity also, as I dug into the literature for this, there are a couple concepts of
Hmm,
intrinsic versus extrinsic familiarity, which
interesting.
intrinsic familiarity is a stimulus that an individual really doesn't have to think about their response. They just kind of they respond through an overlearned or an over practiced way of being,
Right.
versus extrinsic, which means I really have to. I'm faced with a stimulus. I have to think about it. I have to decide what my response is going to be.
Hmm.
It's essentially kind of too much for these folks who have cognitive limitations. So if they are familiar and they can immediately go, oh, I know that, or I've been there, I've heard that, I've danced to that, whatever, then they can respond in a much more natural and effortless way,
Did you think about song content in terms of because we know that there are multiple layers to songs, and that the song could be played many different ways. Just to take the old standard of "You Are My Sunshine," which is a very sad morning song, but people might stay up into the sunshine bit and will stay there
actually. Oh,
and sing happily, but throw in that relative minor at a cadence, and suddenly it just carries the weight of
yeah.
the morning and the loss of that song. Did you consider, like, it, what a wonderful world, Louis Armstrong, so tunes like that might actually be more emotive and bring people into that state? Did you think about keeping it at a various level in terms of energy going into intake, measuring intake?
Yeah. What I did focus in was tempo.
Hmm.
So just the idea of a medium up tempo,
Yeah.
that a certain level of stimulation, that if folks are singing, then they're breathing and they're engaging with that kind of energy. Um, we really tried to not go over the top energy wise, nor get into deep sentimentality with song material.
Right.
So yeah, that's really the only feature. But that's a beautiful concept and consideration. There are just like you said, there are layers upon layers. Male artists versus female artists
Right.
sing the very same songs and what they bring to it emotionally and socially. But too many things, just too many things to think about in terms of, am I ever going to get this study done?
Right. Yeah, well, let's move into some of those results that were really fascinating to read, because as the results were coming in, you were noticing that, and what?
Well, in we had three different sites, and at two of the sites, in the end, um, so the baseline, there was baseline weeks, and then there were treatment weeks, and each facility had 4 weeks of alternating baseline treatment, as we
Right.
then collected data on their food intake. So at two of the sites on baseline days, the residents actually ate more, they ingested more food by volume than they
Mm-hmm.
did on the treatment days, which was entirely contrary to what
Gotcha.
we anticipated,
Yeah.
and blew the original hypothesis out the window. And so then we're left with, how do we explain this?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that was, the discussion was actually kind of fun to deal with, and toss all these things on the table and say, why might this have happened,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. And some of the areas you go into are really ecological, that throw out physical responses, intra and interpersonal responses. Where did what really stands out to you in terms of the possibilities? What really stuck out to you the most?
Well, what I originally thought was that, um, the really upscale nursing home and the way the environment was, um, just a very, very nice environment. Um, I would I kind of assumed that those folks, they were getting better food, so to speak. They were
Right.
getting choice of food rather
Mm.
than here's
Mm-hmm.
your tray, eat what just landed in front of you.
Right.
Um, so I kind of thought that environment would make a difference, or the level of stimulation in the room would make a difference on some
Right.
level. And yet those things are pretty consistent day after day, and so they can kind of be set aside as potential reasons for better or worse eating.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Um, Something I uh, wish I had tracked from the beginning, but I did not, was um, I didn't think about different types of dementia and the potential for um, eating problems with different, frontotemporal dementia versus vascular versus
Mm.
Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
There are truly differences in how um, those folks, as they move through their process, how they how they eat, how they
Right.
still remain engaged with their dining experience. And it actually turns out that frontotemporal dementia, one of the diagnostic features is that these people crave sweets, they crave carbs, and
Hmm.
they will even eat things that they shouldn't eat,
Hmm.
like a pica sort of thing.
Right.
And so I didn't know, of my 28 people, what particular diagnosis
Right.
they had. So that was one of my recommendations, is that if somebody looks at this process again, um, to really find out what type of dementia they're dealing with.
Right.
Yeah. So that was interesting.
So in terms of implications for music therapists, you know, are we to take from the study to be aware of time of day when therapy happens, because serotonin may play a role in terms of, importance of food intake and nutritional intake, or is there just too much, still left unknown to kind of recommend to students, or when groups happen, and things like that?
Um, so the issue of serotonin release, when an individual has a nice experience in music,
Yeah.
or in other stimulating experiences. So that really was. I'm glad you brought it back to that, because that's kind of the ultimate finding here,
Yeah.
is that um, everything else seemed to balance out. Interpersonal, environment, everything seemed to be quite similar. And so I had to think, what maybe is going on the inside, that that's
Yeah.
not a psychosocial factor, but a neurologic factor.
Mm-hmm.
So digging into the research again, serotonin is commonly understood to be released with good experiences, like a music experience where you really enjoy the music, and which is great. But then serotonin also is long recognized as an appetite suppressant.
Present. Mm-hmm.
People who go to a physician for medication to help with to lose weight or whatever, those medications will essentially be serotonin stimulators
Mm.
or uptake, blockers.
Right.
And so it just might be that these folks were having a good enough experience that when they were done, they were sated. They were
Right.
feeling
Groovy.
comfortable, and there wasn't necessarily the need to move to that next stage of filling oneself up, so to speak, because they
Mm.
were filled up, in a matter of speaking. And this actually bore out in the study I talked about that we did back in 2010.
Right.
Our control group on treatment days ate more than our residents. And
Hmm.
so the idea that maybe for folks who are vulnerable in this way, who have nutritional intake complications, perhaps we just make sure that their music therapy session, their really uh, enjoyable, energetic event, happens maybe 30 to 40 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes before
Before.
they actually go in to eat, so that the
Yeah.
serotonin has a chance to dissipate. Um, yeah, it's interesting.
It is. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. I'm curious as to if you could talk a little bit about your experience doing a multi-site repeated trial study. The research I'm familiar with, your work has revolved around philosophical research around rhythm, music improvisation research, and theory related research. So what led you in terms of interest into broadening methodology styles?
So yeah, this is not my niche at all, this type of research. But I thought that we had the the sort of aim, the sort of outcome, projected outcome that really was a positive and approachable um, sort of outcome that called for the question, right, calls for the methodology
Yeah.
or the method. So the
Hmm.
question of can someone's engagement in music right before they eat, can that be a part of the process that either enhances or inhibits that?
Yeah.
So it just kind of made
The
sense to
question
do it
led.
this way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I learned a lot
Yeah.
from
What did you
doing
learn?
this. I learned that I may not do this kind of study again, but it is not easy. It
Right.
is there are so many compromises to be made. We
Right.
kind of alluded that to already with you know with music preference versus familiarity.
Exactly. Right.
There are so many compromises. The whole I'm not a big fan of the whole post-positivist approach unless there truly is an aim that makes sense
Hmm.
um, to approach this way.
Right.
So yeah, so that's why I went there,
And
and
why the decision making process, like we said, is so important, and it's important to be transparent about because those find it could be presented as if it is formulaic or as if it should always be this way, when in reality, researchers of all types are making these very small decisions that are based upon their own worldviews and experiences.
absolutely, absolutely, and I hope that somehow in the article I made somewhat clear that you know this was a valuable experience to aim in this way. Actually, I don't think I had a chance to write that much. I would like to see an epochet of some sort in this type of quantitative research, objectivist research, just like
Just like in
in
qualitative.
interpretive. Yeah, I believe that's important for the reader to know where the researcher comes from.
Specifically for these type of decision making
Yeah,
preferences, yeah,
right, right,
related to the method.
right.
Yeah, yeah, it would be refreshing, certainly, to see that in some form.
Yeah, I advocated for that in a chapter in the research book, and shame on me for not saving enough words in this article to actually do that.
Is there anything that we left out, or anything you'd like to add before saying goodbye? Is there anything unsaid?
Um, I guess I still want, me, and I still want to make sure that Um, even though this study was quite a cause effect study,
Mm-hmm.
the the part of the method that focused on the music and determining the music really was absolutely important,
Yes.
and uh, that that's probably where me comes into this study,
Mm-hmm.
um, the subjective me, where I just said it. This music has to be relevant to these people,
Right.
and how the music is then presented within the sessions. Um, I I stressed with the therapist that I was able to hire to carry out the sessions. We worked together on style, so that familiarity and style and the song had had a cohesion, um, across the three therapists that did the work, and the music that was presented to the residents.
And various music components as well as tempo.
Right,
Yeah.
and that all falls into the style category.
Style category.
How
Yeah.
are you making this
Right.
come to life as they would find it familiar?
Yeah. Do you think that would have, if you would have changed that up in any way? Do you think it sounds like it might not have had any impact necessarily on the findings and results, but you're thinking more in terms of ethical choices, in terms of your own some decision making that you made that were made based upon what you feel as ethical choices in the research itself
Right, ethical and also just
and
philosophical.
philosophical.
If we believe the music matters, darn it,
Right,
the music matters.
right,
So let's bring music that is relevant.
absolutely,
Yeah, right
right on.
on.